All right. How's it going, folks? This is highly in danger of becoming a old man yells at cloud video, but that is a lot of what I do these days. Um, this one is about my issues with mostly Gen Z, maybe millennials to some extent, but millennials, maybe, yeah, millennials and Gen Z, I'd say. I'm kind of on the cusp between Gen X and millennial. I was born in 1980, which is right perfectly on the cusp. So you could call me a early millennial. You could call me a late Gen Xer. Um, but my issues with younger people in general are mostly primarily that, um, you know, I mean they decry capitalism. They are not particularly impressed with the United States. Um, they pretend to, I mean, every young generation wants to rebel to some extent over what exists before. So it's no surprise that they have some of this in them. Now, I can't say that I'm disappointed that some of them recognize capitalism for being the destructive system that it is. But the problem is that, they don't they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. The younger generations. Um, I mean, not to say that there aren't some people. I don't want to make any broad generalizations. I'm sure there are Gen Z kids who get it. That aren't fooled. Maybe it's even more. Maybe it's made to seem like Gen Z kids all think the same way because it suits the capitalist agenda. But all you hear a lot about, it's the obsession with technology and the obsession with consumerism and the capitalist, um, you know, idea of getting ahead that make me feel like Gen Z kids aren't really living up to the standards that they set, or living up to their rhetoric, I guess you could say. Um, and you hear it in the music as well. So I'm going to get around why I don't like the modern taste in music as much, also. And again, it may not even be modern taste; just might be, so much of maybe it just has maybe the powers that be have gotten better at controlling the what gets out, what we hear, how we perceive things. But a lot of this is going back. Like, I could start with the war in the Middle East right now. You know, I think it was much more cut and dry in the 1960s and 70s. You had sort of an independence movement from the Vietnamese. They were also controlled by the communists. I mean, I don't know enough about this history to speak too strongly of it. Basically, communism was on the move. And so, the wealthy capitalists in this country decided that they couldn't risk communism spreading too far. So they decided to wage war on an area where communism was spreading, which was Vietnam. And in that war, it was only about the competing economic systems of capitalism and communism. This was an attempt by capitalists to stop the spread of communism, and it wasn't. It was a war where you know it. It was a difficult opponent. They had guerrilla warfare on their sides. They were fighting in the jungle. Um, you know, I think you know we killed more of them, or sorry, the U.S. killed more Vietnamese than vice versa. But it was a long, protracted war. It wasn't easily won by the United States, and a lot of U.S. children, or youngsters, or I should say, boys that were being sent off to war, um, boys and maybe women back then. I don't remember. I think women were being drafted at that point. I'm not sure. But a lot of U.S. citizens were dying in that war because it was not an easy war. And so I feel like it was more cut and dry. It wasn't clear what the U.S. had to gain. What the U.S. I guess the U.S. citizens had to gain, particularly. We knew it would be better for capitalist business in the United States if communism failed there, but it didn't really make that much of a difference. Vietnam wasn't. The idea was it was like the domino theory, that if Vietnam fell, a lot of other places would fall, and so the capitalism had to put up a fight, before there was before communism started to spread more rampantly. But the amount of effort that we put in, the amount of lives lost, um, you know, the meddling in another country's business, people were not crazy about the war for good reason. It was a stupid war. It didn't really suit the United States interests particularly, especially not the interest, might have suited the interests of big business in the United States, but didn't really suit the interests of the American citizen, because their children are going off to fight and die in these wars, and it wasn't a war that was easily won, so it required a lot of resources, and it just dragged on and on and on, and it took a while. People weren't immediately protesting, but after a while, people started to become more aware of just how much carnage was going on and how many U.S. soldiers were dying, and the horrors of the war going on there, and eventually it sparked the movement that we saw, the anti-Vietnam anti-war movement. And I think in a lot of ways that movement was more justified than the current movement. Nobody likes war. It was of questionable benefit to the United States. So, and it was easy to call for peace then, and it was much easier, much less complicated issue than the Middle East is today. And I think with that, with that anti-war and that sort of a distrust of American, leadership, because people knew that it was being the war. This was a war being fought by, American citizens, basically for the sake of capitalism and big business. And I think that was, it was justifiable to oppose that and to protest against it and call for it to end. And with that came, a whole wave of questioning of the existing way, questioning, since the war was about capitalism, people started to, the hippies in the 60s were even questioning, what was capitalism all about? What was the American dream all about? Was it something worth fighting for? Why was they so afraid of communism? And people had that phrase back then, turn on, tune in, and drop out. The idea was that, striving for success in a capitalistic sense, in terms of just purely making money, didn't bring great fulfillment, didn't make the world a better place, wasn't a virtue in itself. Having wealth wasn't a virtue in itself. That it was better to, live an existence where we all treated each other well, and where it wasn't all about, stepping on the next guy to get ahead, and where you should just really, part of that philosophy was just sort of like exploring reality, and what it would mean to just live without being caught up in the rat race, to just really experience life for what it is, rather than make it into some giant competition. And so that wasn't all hippies. Really the people that embodied that spirit were a small subfraction of the total amount of the counterculture revolution of that time. There was a lot of people that were just there for the fashion of it. It reminds me of that Smash Mouth song. But I'm not gonna bother going into that. I'm not like a huge Smash Mouth fan or anything, but basically, there was people were being really subversive to capitalism at that point at home. They did not like turn on, tune, and drop out. They did not like people doing psychedelics that opened people's minds to a way of life that wasn't just, about pursuing wealth. They didn't like the the questioning of the sort of more traditional ways things have been done, or at least the ways that have been ingrained. There was a lot of heavy mind control going on, and people were trying to throw off the shackles of capitalist mind control at that point. And it was, like I said, it was a small subgroup of the actual hippies. So a lot of people were just there for the long hair. They just liked the look of the long hair. They liked the look of the bell bottoms. They liked they they liked the idea of free love. The lack of responsibility of free love, and they were just there to get high or get fucked up and to have sex and look fancy. And they didn't really care about the message. But there was a faction of hippies that did care, and I think a lot of that faction, especially the artists of the time, the musicians, spoke for that faction in a way that you know was representative. It was like it was somehow that small percentage of hippies that cared, had a voice in music. It was, you could hear the rebellion. You could sense the that counterculture mood in a lot of the music. It wasn't packaged for easy consumption. The music had challenging ideas in it, and it wasn't meant to be easily consumed. It wasn't as accessible as music had been before. It wasn't candy coated. It wasn't overly produced. It was more about exploration and you know sort of it was subversive. It was an attempt to be subversive in music, to really question. It was a lot of questioning of the way of the status quo, and wondering whether things could be done better, and experimentation and exploration into different ways of thinking and different ways of being. And I think that was pretty well reflected in the music of the time, in some ways in the media of the time, otherwise too, music and art of the time. Um, and that's why it was such a, I think it was such a renaissance period in the arts. That's why I think a lot of the boomers, love that period so much, and why people even after the boomers could appreciate it, because you know, it spoke to a authentic movement. It was reflective of some amount of authentic belief and thought, that you know trying to trying to oppose the dominant paradigm, which was just about being in the rat race and living the American dream and blah blah blah. So fast forward to the modern day, and you have kids. They're saying capitalism sucks, but what do? They spend a lot of time on their phones, TikTok, or on watching streaming movies or watching streaming shows. They follow influencers on Instagram, they follow influencers on TikTok, and these influencers, there's nothing subversive about them. They're usually peddling some product. They're very, they're like your standard, you know, as the incel community would say, Chads and Stacy's, these good looking guys and girls that are the cheerleader types, or the, whatever. So now it's not even the cheerleader types, now it's like you're like the hot girl feminists, or you're the, there's still bros out there, but now it's like, oh, if you're mixed racism, then that's really, I don't know. It's just, all I'm saying is that, all these people, it's so there's like this sort of vapid culture where people are obsessed with media. They're obsessed with you know with a lot of these TikTok people are hawking products, or talking about superficial things like how to put on makeup or how to do your hair, or they're doing dance routines that are just kind of like it's all fluff, you know. It's capitalist fluff, you know. It's about being consumers. It's about buying into, and and it's also about exhibitions of wealth and power. Check out my private jet. Check out my private closet. You can make so much money. As a and there's all these guys hawking life coaching and how you can make all this money. Um, on the set up passive streams of income, and this is how you do it, or talking about which fashions are the best and how to put together an outfit and how to do your makeup, like I was saying, or these are all, it's just vapid. Most of this stuff that you see on it's on these Instagram and TikTok, it's not deep. you know it's purely about superficial capitalist approved behavior, things that don't that in no way challenge the wealthy, and we've never been at a time where the wealthy should be challenged more. um, you know Things are extremely difficult for a lot of people. I mean, you know there are people. I mean, I guess if you can, if you've got a decent career, I suppose you're not hurting too much. But there are a lot of people suffering. There's a lot of, if you're an entry level type of employee, or you never got a college degree, you're struggling. Even people with college degrees are struggling because you can no longer really make a lot of money being with a lot of degrees. There's only a select number of degrees now where you can really expect to make any kind of have a decent income. But I don't know. You just have a lot of people. This is why Trump is even a thought to be elected. I mean, the left used to stand up for the little guy, but now the left stands for elites as much as it does the little guy. Um, so the right is pretending to care about the little guy. They don't care about the little guy either. But because the left has become so, you know, has ignored the little guy for so long, then the right can at least claim to care about the little guy, and the little guy actually believes that the right will do something for them, which they won't. But the now the elite of the left have become so attached and so concerned with what became the new topic du jour in terms of the quote unquote rebellion, the resistance. You know, People talk about being anti-capitalist, but really what dominates the headlines in the media is social justice, and identity. You know, People are more concerned about rights for black people, rights for women, rights for trans people, rights for gay people. That has become the thing, you know. And meanwhile, the youth of America, these Gen Z people, are looking down the barrel of a problem that's only getting worse. That is, at an emergency that needs to be addressed immediately, and threatens the well-being of them and their children and their children's children, if it even gets that far. And that is climate change. And we're seeing the first, noticeable effects of climate change starting to take hold. We're seeing the droughts, we're seeing the floods, we're seeing the record high temperatures being set over and over again. We're seeing anomalous weather in times of the year where it shouldn't be. We're seeing the polar ice caps melt. Um, we're seeing the the draining of the aquifers. We're seeing the beginnings of mass migration. We're seeing the farm belts, changing their location. We're seeing nature reacting to, an environment that's no longer, that's sort of forcing migrations, animal migrations, killing trees with, with different pests, new pests, new invasive species. We're seeing the coral bleaching. We're seeing a mass extinction. It's like there's plenty of evidence out there that, climate change is starting to be a problem. And yet it's so detached from these young kids' reality that to them it's more important, to worry about social justice. It's more important to worry about, um, you know, whether, the government can pay for somebody's, um, you know, uh, transitioning hormones, or whether the government can, you know, whether they should ban books, or, what they should be teaching kids, whether kids can go see drag queens. I mean, it's like all these things, whether or not, they should have quotas, or should be, have making sure that companies are trying to be inclusive and promote diversity within their ranks, and make sure, it's like, it's not that these things are unimportant. I think that they matter, but, they have become the forefront of the resistance. Resistance is about these things. Well, I can tell you that capitalism can continue to exist with all these updates. Capitalism is clinging much, is not clinging very strongly. White power in capitalism, it's a thing. They don't want to let white men, they don't want to let women into higher levels. They don't want to let minorities have a place at the table. This is all true. But they can much more easily do that and continue to operate than they can address climate change in a significant and immediate way. Um, the bottom line is that, capitalism still hasn't figured out a way to operate at a profit, um, with the same effectiveness in a world that's truly sustainable. That is going to be a tough nut to crack, and it's going to take a lot of time. And maybe it will take innovation, and maybe that's something that capitalism can do. But, in the process of figuring that out, it's capitalism's dehumanizing people. It's picking winners and losers, and it's making it hard for some people to continue to exist. And it's really not solving the problem. It's not moving fast enough. You listen to these climate scientists, and you know it doesn't seem to me as if capitalism is moving fast enough to mitigate the most devastating effects of climate change that are on the horizon. You know, we've come to an emergency situation where I don't think that capitalism will be capable of providing the solutions that will be needed in time to address the problem. I don't know. I mean, I did watch a guy from Berkeley saying that, he thought that the US was making progress, but that China wasn't making progress fast enough. And China's not even technically supposed to be capitalist. They're supposed to be communist, except for the fact that they're really lately, in the last, I don't know how many years, number of decades, China's been acting more like, really been embracing big business and technology and things like that. And yet they haven't really committed to, it's almost like they adopted the things that capitalism created, that didn't care about the environment. And I guess for whatever reason, I think I mean, you don't really know. It's hard to say because we don't really know what the truth is. This is what we hear. There's a lot of smog in China, that's for sure. So, but I guess the point I'm making is, you know, it's also, we had the luxury of going through a period where we didn't have to use all these sustainable technologies. We built up our economy with the dirty stuff. So to say that, oh well, now we've got it right, now we're, it's like, well, we're really just trying to mitigate all the damage we did building our country up in the first place. And China's probably in the same situation. They're trying to build their country up still. They've gotten pretty far at this point, but they haven't had a chance to make that crossover. And meanwhile, it's like it's all these capitalist devices that created the emissions that we're seeing. The emissions that we're seeing now were largely us as a developing capitalist country. They're largely China, as every other country in the world develops, they're going to go through the same process. They're not going to jump right to the green stuff. They can't afford it. Their economies aren't well developed enough. So capitalism is to blame for the situation that we're in, even if capitalism claims to be the solution to the problem at the same time. Um, and I guess all I'm saying is that, climate change doesn't seem to be an issue that's at the forefront of Generation Z at this point. They're more concerned about things that matter, but don't matter in a existential crisis kind of way, in the way that climate change does. And meanwhile, Gen Z likes to talk about how they don't like capitalism, but then it's hypocritical. They're fully engaged in capitalist modes of thinking, you know. Um, you know, Gen Z women talk badly of capitalism, but then they still wanted to be with men who are successful in a capitalist system. If you wanted to reward, if you wanted to change, to take down capitalism, then you wouldn't reward the most effective capitalists by giving them the love and, adulation that you do, you know. So to say you're a feminist, a modern feminist who doesn't like capitalism, well, your actions don't show that you don't like capitalism. So much is controlled in this world by what women want, because most men just do whatever it takes to get women. And so we don't really care. I don't think most men really care that much about having nice things. Women want nice things. And a lot of women are always saying, well, if women were in charge, things would be better. But, women want nice things more than men want nice things. The reason why men strive to have nice things is because women want them. Now women are saying, well, instead of having to be with a man to have nice things, I can work for those nice things myself, and they're becoming more increasingly, now that they're the ones creating the need for more resources. And meanwhile, they might have those more resources, and they're saying, they don't say, well, I have enough resources, so now my man doesn't need to try for resources anymore. I have the resources myself. I don't need him. But no, women still want a man who makes at least as much or more than they make. The standard is still very high. So, how can you consider yourself anti-capitalist if what you desire as a feminist is a man who makes more money than you do? If you're judging men by their earning power, you're not an anti-capitalist at all. That's the behavior that follows right into what capitalists want. You think wealthy male capitalists want you to, value low status men? No, they want to be on top, and they want, they want to make all the money, and they want women to look up to them like gods. So you're doing exactly what if you claim to be anti-capitalist, then you're still allowing your biological preferences to supersede your stated goal of anti-capitalism. If modern feminists were really anti-capitalists, then they wouldn't fetishize glamour. They wouldn't fetishize, the power and status of wealth. And they wouldn't spend so much time worrying about what influencers thought and what fashions. All these things, top fashions, makeups, all these things cost a lot of money. They're all part of being a consumer. And, I mostly blame women for this. I mean, guys too. Guys are into having status and wealth. I mostly blame women, because the reason why guys want status and wealth is mostly so they can get women. I mean, some guys probably appreciate the finer things in life, the quote unquote finer things in life, or at least the most expensive things in life, because wealthy people really waste a lot of money on things. My aunt and uncle have $50,000 curtains. They're wealthy. This is the kind of stuff rich people waste their money on. They remodel their kitchen when they don't need to. They spend tons of money on landscaping and, you know, on lavish trips and lavish meals and the latest and greatest. I mean, they waste a lot of money on things that they don't need because it's a status game. It's like, well, if I have this thing, then people will be impressed, and I'll look like the best. And people fall for it, and that's and really it's all designed about people don't buy these things because they like these things for what they are. They buy these things because they want to make themselves feel like they're better than other people. They want people to envy them. They want to have an outward showing of opulence to show you, hey, I'm better than you because I earn more money than you. And I feel like women buy into this more than men. Women are more concerned about like if I'm looking at another guy's wallet, I'm not thinking, oh, is that I don't even know who makes wallets. I'm not looking at another guy's shirt and being like, oh, this guy's got Tommy Hilfiger, whatever is popular. I have no idea. He's wearing a Gucci shirt. He's wearing a Ralph Lauren or whatever. He's got a Lacoste on or some shit like that. I don't really care. Some guys do look spiffy in their nice shirts, but we're much less concerned about those things than women are. But oh, does she have a Fendi bag? Oh, does he have Dolce and Gabbana? And oh, what is she? Guys are, I guess, are concerned about what cars they're driving. There's a lot of that going on, where guys will look at another guy's car and be like, oh, this guy's got that car. But I don't know. Again, I think most of the time that we care about these things as guys because we know that's what women want. Women want the finer things. They want the high life. They want to be pampered. They want to feel like they're valuable. And one way that one of the most common ways women feel valuable is that they know that they're with a guy who, has outward displays of status that says, hey, look at my man. He's the fucking king. He's the fucking badass. He's making more money than your man. And I'm a high class. I need the money from a high class man who can give me what I deserve because I'm a queen. That's what this one of these things they say, queen. They all this talk about queens. Um, so it's like as women's earn more money, they just have higher standards for their men, and men feel the pressure of those standards. A lot of men, I think, are struggling because women's standards have come up so much. You've got women, working hard, earning all this stuff, and it used to be men could be fairly attractive to a lot of women if they just had a reasonable amount of stuff. And now the bar is being raised and raised and raised. Now you can't just be women talk about they're wanting their men to make not 100K isn't good enough anymore. You got to make 200K. You got to own your own business. You got to be want to shoot for the stars. You got to be a millionaire. And the stuff that they're watching, you know the influences that they're watching online are these people that just are making crap tons of money. I don't know. It just feels like there's no appreciation for that old spirit of turn in, tune in, drop out, turn on, tune in, drop out. None of the questioning. There's nothing subversive about the culture. They talk about being anti-capitalist, but the culture is fully um, bamboozled, fully wrapped up in having the latest technological gizmos or having the being the best at video games, or you know having the best, Nikes, the newest Jordans, or what kind of car you're driving, what kind of mansion, what kind of vacations are you taking, how exotic are your vacations, and are you traveling first class, and there's just it's like kids are wrapped up in consumerism. They're wrapped up in material things. They're wrapped up in vapid, shallow trivialities. So all this talk about being anti-capitalist, and meanwhile, then you have going back to what I was originally talking about. When it comes to being anti-war, well, the situation in the Middle East is much more complex than the Vietnam War. We've got a lot of history here between the Israelis and the Palestinians. You know, And because identity is the cause du jour, as I mentioned before, you know, Gen Z activists blend, sort of blend it all down to, well, the Palestinians are darker. Israelis look like white people. Palestinians look like dark people. Therefore, we're in support of the Palestinians. It almost feels like it's just a matter of, well, because they're used to fighting for racial equality and for the championing of minorities, that because Palestinians are darker and have historically, I guess, had less money, that we'll just push for them. We'll stand behind them because they've got darker skins. It's become that reductive. Oh, they've got darker skin, so they're the brown people. We got to support black and brown people. So let's go Palestinians. That's it. And it's just silly. I mean, there's no awareness of the history of what the Jews have been through. I'm not trying to say I'm pro Israel either, because Benjamin Netanyahu is an idiot, and they're obviously handling this whole situation over there in a inhumane way. So I'm not trying to say that these protesters are out and out wrong. But there's a lack of nuance or awareness of the nuance of these issues. It's not as black and white as the Vietnam War was. And meanwhile, you've got the U.S. support in the region, and U.S. The reason why U.S. supports Israel is because they are a proxy of control in the region. That is, oil is still extremely valuable, and the U.S. needs to have some kind of military presence or some kind of allies in that region so that their presence can be felt. And that's why they give money to the Israelis. In a way, it's similar to Vietnam in that you've got the, less traditional capitalist for less traditional, you've got something that once was communism and is now some kind of weird perversion of communism, which is, the Iranians, the Chinese, the Russians, places that used to be, at least were attempting to be some actual version of communist. It wasn't really great communism in the old days, but now it's become even less like it's moved even further away from what uh, Marx and Engels intended, um, because it has embraced business, because Russia is run by um, you know corrupt leadership. Um, there's still a war going on to some extent between the traditional forces of capitalism now, whatever you want to call what Russia, China, and Iran are. But it's not as cut and dry as it once was, I feel like. Um, and it's almost like, people are so concerned about, worrying specifically about the Palestinians that they don't think about, the greater battle here, the greater battle for control that's going on in that region. And I'd be okay with people, I'd even be okay, but the people have been anti-American. There's reasons to be anti-American. You know, we are, we do represent the uber wealthy. A lot of the uber wealthy live in this country. Um, so I understand being anti-American. If it means you're being anti-wealthy, that makes sense if you're going to be an anti-capitalist. But then you go, like I say, and you know, and you support capitalism in your deeds and your actions and your beliefs, but you say you're against it. So you want to talk about how, we don't want to support Israel anymore and they want to withdraw aid, but your actions don't say that you really have. There's no coordinated action against the wealthy, is what I'm saying, amongst the youth. You can protest all you want, and I'm not trying to say that I don't have some sympathy for the Palestinian people, but this is a much more complex issue than just, so many people I think would just want to see Israel eradicated. And, That's sort of ignoring the plight of Jews, and the need for Jews to potentially have a homeland. You're sort of just, I don't know. To me, it's like, though, honestly, I see both sides of being at fault, Israelis and the Palestinians, because they're incapable of sharing the land. And there's a certain pride involved here where it's just like, well, my religion's better than your religion. It's an inability to share and live together. Instead, you know, Israelis have been controlling and making the lives difficult for the Palestinians, and that's why Hamas attacked in October. But the reason why the Israelis have been so controlling of the Palestinian people is because they have been a target of the Arab world, you know, for quite a while now. There's been lots of suicide bombings and lots of terrorist attacks by the representatives of Iran and the Palestinians in the region that, Israel is trying to gain control because they don't want to be wiped out. And Israelis did exist in that region many years ago, and they were booted by the Romans. So they want their land back from, having been a long time away. And it's like, who's to say whose land that really belongs to? Is there some reason why the Palestinians were there for a long time, but the Jews were there for a long time, much further ago? It's almost like saying, like, what if, if the Native Americans were to ask for this land back, as an American, are you ready to? It's like, look at it from your own home situation. What if the Native Americans rose up and said, get off, you put us in the reservations, you made our lives terrible. You don't listen to what we had to say. Native Americans warn us not to continue on with capitalism, not to disrespect the earth, not to take nature for granted. And if they were calling for you, the person, you'd be here, rah-rahing the Palestinians and saying, oh, the Israelis should get off their land. Well, what would you say if the natives suddenly told you to get off their land? You're going to be as quick to jump on that bandwagon? You're going to get up and move. Oh, sorry, yeah, this is your land. That's right. I forgot. We took it over and we, subjugated your people and, shoved you into, killed you with smallpox and shoved you into reservations. It's easy for you to say, oh, well, I support the Palestinians. But if you were put into a similar situation where, suddenly you were the occupiers, how'd you feel about them telling you, yeah, you got to get off. You got to get off our land. It's like the modern generation is missing that perspective, and that's sort of what's going on in Israel, Palestine. So much of the support that the U.S. is giving has to do with just a global, a battle between world powers in the region. And it's almost like I think most young people are just overlooking that and saying, well, we got to support the brown people. They reduce it down to just that. Or maybe they are anti-American and feel like, that that we have to, that we have to, it's like it's almost like this, I don't know. I would think I would appreciate it more. Like I think I could be okay with them being anti-American, power in the region if people cared more about climate change. The reason why we need to have a presence in the Middle East is because we still need access to that oil. But it would be possible to, if people were pushing, if young people were pushing for, I think I would take them more seriously if they were pushing for us to become energy independent in this country, you know, to not have to rely on oil at all. But, you know, kids don't show a lot of dedication to the cause of becoming free of all need for foreign energy, you know. I don't think, if you want America to stop supporting Israel, then, you know, then push your government to adopt policies that will put us in a place where we no longer require inputs of foreign oil. But people don't see how, our need for energy is related to the war that's being fought in the Middle East. They don't see how their support for capitalism, is part and parcel of our support for Israel. It's all wrapped up together. If you're a supporter of capitalism, then indirectly you are supporting our efforts in Israel, because capitalism is concerned with control, world dominance, and you can't rebel against Israeli occupation if you don't also rebel against capitalism as a whole and the wealthy. And I guess that's really, you know, getting it, sort of whittling it down to what my overall point here is, that it just feels incongruous. It feels hypocritical to support the Palestinians and not understand how your own actions are part of what keeps Israel supported in the Middle East. You can protest all you want, and it's really not going to get anything done. I can tell you. My era of protest was against the war in the Middle East. Because we knew that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And we knew that the wealthy and powerful just wanted to change the government in Iraq, so again, for more control in the region. Similar to what's going on with Israel. So we protested against the war in the Middle East. We protested against, we knew it was going to be a waste of money. We knew that it was being done to enrich, is done for more control over, to try to gain a friendlier relationship with an oil producing region, to put some of our own operatives in control of, or to create better relationships where deals could be made for the oil over there, and also to support weapons manufacturers here, because they were going to need a lot of weapons for the war, and they were going to need a lot of reconstruction of oil infrastructure and military infrastructure because of the war. And Dick Cheney had connections with those industries and wanted to support those industries and give out huge no-bid contracts to those companies to rebuild and to assist. It was we knew that the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war was mostly about, again, world power, but it wasn't wrapped up with, it wasn't specifically about, we didn't want to go to war, not because we cared about, the Iraqi people or the Afghanistan people, but we knew because wasn't a smart move in terms of the American taxpayer. That war cost us a fortune, and American citizens didn't see any direct benefit from it, particularly at all. Most of the money from that war, from the outcomes of that war, went to the wealthy and powerful. It was something that they wanted to do, and we knew that it was costing us, the American citizen, so that the wealthy could become wealthier. And that's why we protested. And they didn't listen to us. There was at the time, they had coordinated anti-Iraq war protests across the globe, and it set a record for a total number of people protesting. I don't know if that record, I doubt that record's been beat to this date. And it didn't do anything. And they called us like a focus group or something like that and said, well, we can't, we hear what you're saying, but we still want to do this. And they went and did it anyway. And that was the point at which I became a real cynic about the value of protests. So you got people, what the protests really serve to do now, you're not going to change anyone's mind with these college protests. You can make noise if you want, like we made noise in our day, in my day. And the wealthy and powerful don't give a crap what you say. They will go on to the Middle East and, kill Palestinians and support the Jews, because that's what serves their power. And really what the protests mostly serve to do now, I'm not trying to say I'm totally opposed to the protests, but what a lot of them really tend to do at this point is make people who are, Jewish people, feel insecure and scared. Jewish faculty member, Jewish classmates a lot of them are becoming demonized by this protesting. and a lot of them feel intimidated and feel as if they're being lumped in with the oppressors, and that it's okay to speak negatively of the Jews and to discriminate and to be anti-Semitic. That's really what gets across with these protests in large. I'm sure there's some nuance to some of these kids. Some of these kids, I think, are being clear that they're not anti-Semitic, that they're just opposed to U.S. presence, or U.S. support of what they call genocide. I mean, for one, what's going on? I mean, yeah, a lot of Palestinians are being killed, but genocide is the systematic killing of a people, and it's a big word to throw around when Hitler killed 6 million Jews. The Nazis killed 6 million Jews. I think 34,000 people have died. That's not nothing. That's a lot of people, but 34,000 versus 6 million. You throw the word genocide around, and it's easy with hyperbole like that to demonize Jews as a whole. There's so little nuance to it that mostly what the protests do is divide people. You know, they're not going to achieve any real results. You'll soon find out, young people. Maybe you're just not disillusioned enough yet, but get ready, you will be. I was disillusioned too. The wealthy and the powerful need to continue to have a locus of control in the region. And all your protesting isn't going to make one single tiny bit of difference. It's just not costly enough to most Americans for anyone besides you to get behind. And even you don't realize how, while you outwardly are opposed to our presence in the region, you support our presence in the region with your value system and with your lack of rejection of with your acceptance of capitalist benchmarks and capitalist goal setting and adoption of a capitalist mindset and of the idea of getting yourself ahead in the rat race and being successful and having opulence and things like that. It's like that belief those beliefs are incongruous with what you're calling for, and so it just makes you seem like you're out of touch with reality. And meanwhile, on the other side of it, you want to talk about, like I was mentioning, how with Vietnam you had real people. The arts of the time reflected what I think was a more righteous cause. And you look at the art of the time of young people, people supposedly concerned, these people concerned with supposedly with supporting brown people, supporting diversity, whatever. And your music doesn't speak to being anti-capitalist at all. Who's the popular star now? Taylor Swift. Does Taylor Swift sing anything about Palestinians? Does she sing anything about how the vast differences in wealth inequality, and how people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are more out of balance rich with the poor people in the world than have ever been before? Is there any kind of real subversive call in the most popular music? Taylor Swift is the queen right now. She is on top. What does she sing about? Boyfriends, breakups, emotional issues, issues of being, popular, or being, I don't really know, being pretty, feminism, these things are not really challenging the dominant paradigm. There's no, Taylor Swift doesn't sing about how we shouldn't be aspiring to be rich and famous. It's like Taylor Swift is held up as an embodiment of what women should want to be. They should want to be rich and famous. They should want to be powerful. And they should want to be the pinnacles of capitalism. That is incongruous with your supposed beliefs on what's going on in Palestine and Israel. And it goes for most of the Gen Z music, or at least most of the popular Gen Z music. What people know about, Cardi B, you know, Cardi B is all about, fancy things, fancy clothes, um, you know, what's his name? Post Malone, um, you know, I don't know, The Weekend, um, I don't even know who's popular now as much, Harry Styles or whatever, um, Miley Cyrus. Any of these people focus on any of these people focusing on, class struggle, any of these people focusing on, environmental degradation, or any of these people talking about you know, the greatest single threat to humanity that's currently reaching its point of no return, you know. Is anyone talking about, how we're allowing the rich and powerful who are control the levers of power in the world and what we do? Is anyone talking about how they're leading us into an incredibly dangerous period in our history where, you know, human existence is threatened, our civilization is being threatened. The wealthy and the powerful do not have our best interests at heart. It's a system based on short-sighted selfishness over, any kind of concept of where are we headed, what is all this, what does worshiping wealth lead to? What is the short-term goal of increasing your bottom line and having more money than the next guy? How does that move us forward as a human race, None of that's being talked about in popular music. It's ignored in popular music. Now, maybe you could say, well, there's underground bands that are focusing on those things. I don't doubt that that's true. But those are niche markets, There might be some of you that are the real deal. I'm not trying to paint all Gen Z people with the same brush, because there's probably some Gen Z guys, and maybe there's more than I realize, and this the popular narrative is that people only care about Taylor Swift, that people only care about some of those other big artists I mentioned. But at some point, those people that care about those things, like I mentioned before, the things that really, are coming to a head, the things that young people should be primarily concerned about, more so than social justice, more so than diversity and inclusion. Things people should really be concerned about, the things that are a major threat that need to be addressed immediately, or the consequences will be dire. You know, in the '60s, some of these smaller factions would get more noise. Somehow, the people that were really being subversive, the people that were really calling power, really speaking truth to power, and calling into question our way of being, they got some press. They were paid attention to. Now those people, if they're underground, they're niche. They take up a small. Where is the you need to make a cultural impact that says, you know where's the anger, where's the outrage, where is the cry for help, where is the call for people to snap out of it, where's the wake up call for people, like that should be popular media right now. If Gen Z were to be taken seriously, then they should be able to push those types of serious issues to the forefront. You know, um, Feminists should, you know, feminists should be, not caring about the status of their boyfriends. Um, People shouldn't be, striving to make more money and to get ahead in a capitalistic sense, but to get ahead in terms of a social well-being sense, in terms of a communal good sense, in terms of a of a real reckoning with where we see ourselves, where we find ourselves, the challenges that we face, the immediate and intense challenges. I mean, Greta Thunberg has it more right than most of the youngsters. But Greta Thunberg, while she's supported, it tends to be like she's more supported in terms of her feminism than she is in her calls for you know addressing climate change. Um, you know, Gen Z, you know, you can hear it in their media. You can see it in their distraction. You can see it in their lack of subversiveness and their lack of. And now is the time when people should be more than ever, you know, becoming aware of how we're being manipulated and putting out the call for explosive, direct confrontational action with the powers that be, because we are at a point which, if that doesn't happen, you know, we're in danger of seeing civilization collapse. And I feel like that's just something that Gen Z, they might be peripherally aware of it, but they're not willing to put their lives on the line. They're not willing to ruffle any feathers. They're not willing to cast off the the programming that they've been subject to. You know, they're unaware. They'd rather do something. They'd rather do something easy. They'd rather go out and say, "Oh yeah, let's support brown people." Oh, those white people in the Middle East are trying to eradicate the brown people. Let's go out there and pull for the brown people. It's totally detached from the larger reality. It's a wedge issue, and they allow everyone to be divided. That's the other thing about this diversity. They make white men the enemy. So they can't really join with. It's like it creates an impossibility for a united faction to occur where it's just young people. It's they create they create these divisions on in terms of like, oh well, if you're a white man, then you're the problem. And when white men are made to feel like the problem, they react against that. They're like, oh well, I'm going to become a Trumper now because you don't appreciate who we are. You're rejecting masculinity. You don't think men are making good leaders. Well, now we're jumping over to this party that directly opposes you, and so it's a divide and conquer scheme that's going on here. They have you so concerned with saying that white men are the problem, and white men don't see how they're being manipulated by the other side either. In a lot of ways, they're also just as much of a part of the problem. They go over to Trump because and MAGA Republicans because they're telling them what they want to hear, that your value, that we care about white men, that we think it's okay to be a man and to be masculine. And so everything gets divided. And the liberals calling for inclusion and gay rights and all these things don't understand that them focusing almost exclusively on these issues, you know, to the detriment of more involvement with climate change and real, and wealth inequality. You know, they don't see how, you're playing into the strategy of the wealthy when you really, you know, beat a dead horse with the inclusion of with inclusion, diversity, and social justice. You create divisions. You're creating this division of white men into one camp and everyone else into another camp. Women and minorities into another camp, and it just creates division that keeps people from joining together to the battle against wealthy industrialists, wealthy capitalists. They're keeping you factionalized. They have you worrying about abortions. They have you worrying about religion, and they have you worrying about um, you know leadership and all these things. And not like these things don't matter, but you know they take up all the headlines intentionally. And so you don't think about the wealth inequality. You don't think about the dire situation that the capitalism finds itself in with the environment on a precipice. You don't think about the pointlessness of consumerism and the short-sightedness of always worrying about the next bottom line and about worrying about vapid material displays of opulence. And that's just the issue, you know. Gen Z doesn't understand how they're pawns in the larger game. They don't understand who the enemy is, and they make the enemy into each other, and they want to spend more time rallying against each other, the Trumpers versus the feminists, and the social justice warriors. That's what the war has become. That's not what it's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about the little guy versus the big guy, and you know the big guy has manipulated people so that they've lost that script. That they're more concerned about things that really divide us more than unite us. We need a united front of the people that are being that are at the whims of power. Most of us don't have a lot of choice. We have to, they make the decisions and we live with their decisions. And their decisions are leading us into a dangerous place. And Gen Z has no awareness of this. They're fooled. They're fooled by the messaging. They're fooled by the propaganda, and their music reflects it. Where's the anger? Where's the outrage? Where's the understanding of where we find ourselves as a society, as a civilization? Where the real threats are. There's no understanding. Nobody cares. People are so wrapped up in their individual lives and in trying to find ways to make themselves feel like they're better people than other people. Whether it be with people want to feel like, oh, I'm better than you because I don't judge gay people. I'm better than you because my God is better than your God. Or I'm better than you because I'm atheist and you believe in God. Even that. Or it's all become a pride game. You got a lot of people. I'm better than you because I believe in feminism. I'm better than you because I believe in inclusion. I'm better than you because I read banned books. You know, I'm better than you because I support transgender people. It's just kind of like people trying to find ways to put themselves above other people when we shouldn't be trying to do that. We should be joining together to, make the people who are responsible for the dire situation we find ourselves in, make them pay for putting us in this position. And it just seems like all I feel is cluelessness. I don't see an awareness of these things. I see people that are fighting over piddly issues and not addressing the elephant in the room. So there you go. That's pretty much it. This is my indictment of Gen Z / millennials. You know, they're too wrapped up in the propaganda of capitalism to understand how they're being manipulated, how understand how they're pawns in the chess game. And if we stopped focusing on division and we pulled together and realized that that we're in an emergency situation and that things need to start changing for the better, we need to elect someone that's not going to support the liberal elite or the conservative elite. We need to support people that are going to represent the little guy. The little guy is not interested in helping big business. We have to support people that are interested in making government free from influence from wealthy people. That's the first step. That should be the rallying cry of youth today. Let's get a government that works without the influence of the wealthy. Let's put a stop to lobbying. Let's put a stop to, you know, to to elections that are funded by, you know, by the wealthy, and let's start having elections that are funded by the people. Let's make sure that the people that are elected to office are not beholden to any large corporation whatsoever. Let's hire everyday people like you and me to run the country, not billionaires, millionaires, and people who stand to gain from being in positions of power. Let's come up with a better system than money, or some kind of incentivize people to do the right thing rather than just to do whatever it takes to make money. Let's think about, let's come up with ideas to change our system fundamentally, you know, not to, you know, try to make piecemeal solutions that don't really make a big difference in the long run. People need to be calling for dramatic revolutionary change, or we're going to find ourselves in a lot of trouble. And I don't know if Gen Z and the millennials really have the fortitude and the mental strength to do that. I feel like they'd rather just, they'd rather just pretend that they're making a difference. They'd rather speak up when it's easy and not make any real sacrifices, not sacrifice their devices, not sacrifice their streaming media, not sacrifice their 2-minute video clips or 30-second video clips, or however long they are, not sacrifice their worship of influencers and status and opulence and materialism and shallow looks and things that don't matter. So I'm not saying it's the end for you already. Gen Z is starting to step aside for Gen Alpha, whatever they're calling this next group. Maybe this video is more for them. I don't know. Gen Z is not so old that they can't change, but they're probably not going to listen to me, and they really should. But they're too comfortable. They don't know how to battle really. They're just not tough enough to deal with it. I get the feeling Gen Alpha, the next generation, is going to come upon some hard times, and they're going to have to be tough enough to deal with it. And maybe, hopefully, as a result of that, as a result of the major challenges we face as a you know as a consequence of the inability of the millennials and Gen Z to actually make any real change. Once Gen Alpha starts seeing more serious consequences from climate change, we'll probably see at some point an outpouring of art that reflects the anger and the the mindset of vengeance against those who didn't do enough. But a lot of these protests right now, a lot of what's going on right now, it's all just a bunch of noise, sound and fury representing, what's it called? Full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That's what's going on right now. And it's a sad reflection in the art of Gen Z, or at least in the popular art of Gen Z. You need to put in a little more effort. You need to sacrifice a little more. You need to practice what you preach. You need to not be a hypocrite. And you need a culture that represents that same level of sacrifice, that same level of subversiveness. I'm not trying to say that my culture had it, because we didn't do much better. But at some point, things are going to get hard enough, and I think we're going to see people rise up. Hopefully, it'll be Gen Alpha. It might have to be Gen Alpha, but Gen Z, it's not too late for you if you listen to me. Cast off the usual. Don't listen to the propaganda. Don't watch advertisements. Don't believe that you're as good as your income. That if you're not making 80 grand or 100 grand, that you're not succeeding. Don't believe that if you don't have a hot girlfriend and a nice car and a nice house and whatever, how many kids, and all that shit, that you're a failure in life. What makes you a failure is your inability to stand up to power. But if you can ever, if Gen Z ever starts really standing up to power, if Gen Z ever starts really being willing to make the kind of sacrifices necessary to you know, the kind of sacrifices necessary to start making a real change in the world, then maybe I can generate some respect for them. But as it stands now, Gen Z's hypocrisy Gen Z's general laziness. I was going to also mention, last thing I'll mention is, this idea that, oh, yeah, you know, Gen Z likes to think, oh, well, I'm not going to be a slave to the man. So what'll I do? You know, I just won't show up to work. I won't try as hard. I won't give a shit. But you know what happens when you do that? Um, you force guys like me in the later generations, Gen Xers, Boomers, or some Millennials. You force us to work harder to cover your ass. You're not sticking it to the man. You're sticking it to us. It's not. Um, you know, it's just not effective. People can't keep their jobs when you're only working half-assed, and I don't know. Nothing would function if everybody worked the way you work. Maybe that would be a good thing. I don't know. This is probably not worth me getting into. I was wrapping it up nicely, and I kind of went off on a tangent. All I know is for some whatever reason, I end up having to cover for Gen Z's total lack of willingness to put any real effort in. And I guess I understand that, but it would be nice if you were going to put real effort in, it should be real effort towards activism that's scared, they're wealthy, that got a message across that we're tired with the way things are, and that's not what Gen Z is doing. Most of their solutions are lazy. Most of their solutions don't really amount to any real challenge to authority or power, and it's reflected in the art that Gen Z produces, or that they consume, I should say, and millennials. And if you ever want to be taken seriously, you're gonna have to do better, because there's a reason why people aren't impressed. It's because you're a bunch of hypocrites.